Alright, in this video let's look at solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. And we're going to have problems that are going to use the imaginary I. So the first trick is solving a quadratic formula is, well, first memorize the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is set for problems where it's ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And when ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, then x will always equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And if you want to think about the steps to solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula, the first step is you have to rewrite the problem as ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. In other words, if everything is not on one side equal to 0, you have to put everything on one side so it's equal to 0. And the second thing is you plug in a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. And then you simplify. So let's look at an example. In our first example, we have x squared plus 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. So the first step is everything has to be on one side equal to 0. In that case it is. So let's look at what a is. A in this case is 1, b is 4, and c is minus 3. So you're going to write out the quadratic formula, minus b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. To be safe, what I do is everywhere there's a variable, I put a parentheses. And now I plug in the values of a, b, and c in the appropriate places. So that's going to be a minus 4. That's going to be a 4 there. That's going to be a 1. That's going to be a minus 3, and that's going to be a 1. Now at this step, what I do is I only do what's underneath the square root here. So that's minus 4 plus or minus square root over 2. And that's 4 squared is 16. Now this is a negative times a positive times a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative times a negative is a positive, so that's going to be plus 12. And then I'm going to have minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 2. And this is actually your answer. It's not simplified yet, but that's your answer there. What we have to do next is we have to look at what's underneath the square root. This is the square root of 28. We have to see if we can find a way to simplify that. Square root of 28 is just simply, 28 is 4 and 7. And 4 is a perfect square. So that's going to be minus 4 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 2. Now at this point you have to be careful. You can't separately cancel the 2 and the 2. But because you can simplify the 2 and the 4, both of these numbers with a 2, then you can factor a 2 out of everything. So you divide this number, and this number by 2. So that'll be a 2, that'll be a 1, and that'll be a 1. And your final answer is going to be minus 2 plus or minus root 7. And that's how you solve the quadratic formula. Let's look at another problem, slightly harder. Let's look at 6x squared minus 6x is equal to 2x minus 3. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need everything on the same side equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And I get 6x squared minus 6x minus 3 is equal to 2x. And then I need to move the 2x over, so I'm going to subtract 2x and subtract 2x. And I have 6x squared minus 8x minus 3 is equal to 0. And A is equal to 6, and B is equal to minus 8, and C is equal to minus 3. And now I'm going to plug those into the quadratic formula. I'm going to raise this up so I have a little bit more room. So I have x is equal to minus b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2 times a. I plug in the a, b, and the c, so that's going to be a minus minus 8 plus or minus square root. That's a minus 8 squared minus 4 times 6 times minus 3 over 2 times 6. Plug a b in here, plug an a in here, and plug a c in here. Now the way that I do this is I simplify what's under the square root first. So that's a minus minus 8, that's a positive 8, plus or minus square root. 2 times 6 is 12. So let's focus really carefully here. Be very careful. That's minus 8 squared. A negative times a negative will be positive, so that's 64. And here you have 4 times 6 times 3, but that's a negative times a positive times a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative times a negative is a positive. So that's going to be a positive. And then you have 4 times 6, which is 24. And 24 times 3. I'm going to use a calculator for that. 24 times 3 is going to be 72. So my unsimplified answer is 8 plus or minus the square root 136 over 12. And I say unsimplified because I believe that I can simplify 136. So let's look at the calculator here. 136, let's see if 16 goes evenly into 136. It's 8.5, so it does not. Let's try 4. 136 divided by 4 is going to be 34. So that's 4 and 34. If the square root of 136 is the square root of 4 and the square root of 34, that's 2 root 34. A lot of times when I'm doing square roots, I do them off to the side. So that's going to be 8 plus or minus 2 square root of 34 over 12. And you have to be very careful here. I can't separately cancel the 8 and the 12, but if I can find a number that will go into the 2, the 8, and the 12, I can. In this case, 2 goes into all of them. So this becomes a 4 and a 1, and this becomes a 6. And my final answer would be 4 plus or minus square root of 34 over 6. And I can't simplify the 4 and the 6 because there's not a number in front of the square root of 34 that can simplify. And that's my answer. The entire problem would look like this. Let's do one more problem. Let's do 4x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. It's already, everything's on one side equal to 0, so that's not a problem. A is equal to 4, B is equal to 2, and C is equal to 1. Let's plug it into the quadratic formula. X is equal to minus b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2 times a. That's a minus 2 plus or minus square root. That's going to be 2 squared minus 4 times 4 times 1 over 2 times 4. I'm going to do what's in the square root first. 2 times 4 is 8. I'll get that out of the way. This is 2 squared is 4. Be very, very careful here. That's 4 times 1, but that's a negative times a positive. Negative times a positive is a negative. Times a positive is still a negative, so that's 4 minus 16. And your unsimplified answer is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of minus 12 over 8. And at this point, you have 2 options depending on, essentially on the context. If you said there was no real solution, that would be correct, or you can solve with I. And whether you're going to say no real solution or solved with I really depends on the context of the problem. In this chapter, I want you to solve with I, or simplify with I if you wish. So that's minus 2 plus or minus. Remember, when you're simplifying a square root and there's a negative inside, the first thing to do is break it up into minus 1 and 12. So you have minus 2 plus or minus I root 12 over 8. Now let's simplify 12. What perfect square goes into 12? That would be 4 and 3. So that's minus 2 plus or minus square root of 4, square root of 3 over 8 with an I. Square root of 4 is simply 2, so that's minus 2 plus or minus 2I root 3 over 8. The 8 and the 2 don't separately cancel, but since you can cancel the 2, and the 8 all together, 2 goes into all of those. So you get minus 1 plus or minus I root 3 over 4. And the very last step is we want to break up the real and the imaginary parts. So your final answer is minus 1/4 plus or minus root 3 over 4 I. And that's how you do quadratic formula.